We've had, as a result of the election broadcast, many thousands of telephone calls that we've dealt with in our Eastleigh office. In fact, so much so that we're keeping the office open for an extra month just to field all these calls. We will, between now and the end of the year, be setting up constituency associations across the country. So our job, I think, at this stage is structural, really.
You don't feel as though, in a sense, a one-issue party will rapidly disappear off the political scene?
No, I don't. How can this be a one-issue party? We're talking about whether we are in the future to control our own foreign policy, whether we are to control our own financial policy. Every aspect, every major aspect of our national life is under threat, or at least our ability to make decisions on them is under threat. So no, we are not a one-issue party. That having been said, we will have for the next general election a much broader manifesto, particularly on the economy, and we intend to put before the electorate a sensible plan of how we're going to raise money and how we're going to spend money. The other parties will fight the next general election telling you how much money they're going to spend, but won't tell you where it's going to come from. No, we are going to put that to the people next time round. So look for a much broader base on the UKIP.
Mr. Farage for the Independence and Democracy Group. For 2 minutes.
Prime Minister, 6 months ago you came here, you impressed everybody with your reform agenda, even me. I said if you achieved your goals, I would support you. Economic reform was the cry. And within a couple of weeks, the Commission had proposed to scrap 68 new laws. I thought, crikey, perhaps Blair's going to do it. Perhaps he really is going to reform and change. But no, under your presidency, there have been 3,350 new legislative acts. Total failure on economic reform. On the CAP, you said you'd work to achieve a consensus for reform. Well, in a way you have, I suppose, because you've got 24 countries against you. No CAP reform until 2014. On the budget, you said there'd be no surrender of the UK rebate. Well, it seems to me that you've given away £7 billion of British taxpayers' money for nothing in return. Your only achievement is to open talks with Turkey, which is opposed by the vast majority of people in Europe and will lead to an even higher bill. Why should British taxpayers pay for new sewers in Budapest, for a new underground system in Warsaw, when our own public services are crumbling in London? Why should we pay? Why should we pay a penny piece into an organisation whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for the last 11 years in a row? This budget deal is game, set and match to President Chirac. No cheese-eating surrender monkey he. Unlike you, he stands up for the French national interest, not some bizarre notion of Europe, and he has outclassed and outplayed you at every turn. Your only real achievement is that Britain is now isolated, alienated. We are completely alone within the European Union, which is why it's been said before. Hang on a second. Everybody else gets an extra minute, Mr. President. I'm asking for 10 seconds. Thank you. Which is why, Prime Minister, I urge you. It's often been said that you wanted to be the permanent President of Europe. Please stay on for a further 6 months, 6 more months of the British presidency, and they'll kick us out. Thank you.
Well, Barry, thank you. And I must say it's very good to be here and to feel so welcome in Manchester from all sides. The fact that I was, taken off the official programme and barred entry to the secure area, despite the fact that politicians and lobbyists from all over the world, of whatever political hue, have been welcomed in, doesn't worry me. I've been thrown out of far worse places than the Tory conference in Manchester. And I come along to a Bruges group as somebody who is not a fraud. I've been a member of this organisation for 25 years. And I've done my best during those 25 years to come along to the meetings and sit in the audiences and listen to people like Bill Cash speak. And I've tended over those years to have the utmost respect, particularly at the time of Maastricht, for what those rebels tried to do. But I have to say, Bill, I'm sorry to say this, but listening to you this afternoon, I've realised that you are a hopelessly out-of-date tribal politician who has not recognised that British politics has fundamentally changed, and to ask me to ask me to support a party led by Mr Cameron in order that we can get back our national independence, I'm sorry, you've got to do rather better than that. You really have. And I mean, don't forget, Bill, that at exactly this time last year, at the last Tory party conference, the official Cameron position, which was argued with great passion, is that he did not want there to be a referendum on our membership of the European Union. He said it 5 times publicly. 5 times he said it because he said, I believe we must remain members of the European Union. Now, we come to this conference with Mr Cameron promising a distant referendum. This, of course, from the same man who not so long ago gave us a cast iron guarantee that if he became Prime Minister, there'd be a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, and then, of course, he let us down like a cheap pair of braces. This one comes after he gets a majority and after a renegotiation, and is nothing more than an attempt to kick the issue into the long grass for the course of the next 4 years. But the real question, Bill, is why is there a referendum promised this year? Is it because of the Tory Eurosceptic backbenchers? Is he really frightened of them? Well, Bill, you said earlier that you voted 47 times against the Maastricht Treaty.
True.
But there's one thing you forgot to tell this audience. Go on. That you voted for the Maastricht Treaty by supporting John Major in the motion of confidence debate. When it came to the ultimate test, you failed the test. You failed the test. You put your party before this country.
That would have led to John Smith taking over.
You see, now poor old Bill says that would have left to John Smith taking over. Tribal politics. Some sort of pretence there's now a difference between the Labour and the Conservative parties. When actually what we've done is given away the ability to govern our own country. I spent 20 years before getting involved in politics working in the City of London, working in the private sector. I worked damned hard up until lunchtime every single day that I was there. But I can tell you that Britain's biggest industry, Bill, Britain's biggest industry, 10% of our GDP, and it now doesn't matter whether we have David Cameron in Downing Street or Ed Miliband in Downing Street, because in November 2010, since your great leader became Prime Minister, and on a 3-line whip, British Conservative MEPs voted to transfer control of Britain's biggest industry to a French bureaucrat who wishes us no good, and 3 new European regulatory authorities. I'm sorry, Bill, the world has moved on.
Well, thank you, Mr. Schultz. Isn't it funny? You know, when I came here 17 years ago and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you? And the reason you're so upset, the reason you're so angry, has been perfectly clear from all the angry exchanges this morning. You, as a political project, are in denial. You're in denial that your currency is failing. You're in denial. Well, just look at the Mediterranean. No. As a policy to impose poverty on Greece and the rest of the Mediterranean, you've done very well. And you're in denial over Mrs. Merkel's call last year for as many people as possible to cross the Mediterranean into the European Union, has led to massive divisions between countries and within countries. But the biggest problem you've got, and the main reason the United Kingdom voted the way that it did, is you have, by stealth, by deception, without ever telling the truth to the British or the rest of the peoples of Europe, you have imposed upon them a political union. You've imposed upon them a political union. And when the people in 2005 in the Netherlands and France voted against that political union, when they rejected the Constitution, you simply ignored them and brought the Lisbon Treaty in through the back door. What happened? What happened last Thursday was a remarkable result. It was indeed a seismic result, not just for British politics, for European politics, but perhaps even for global politics too, because what the little people did, what the ordinary people did, what the people who have been oppressed over the last few years and seen their living standards go down, they rejected the multinationals, they rejected the merchant banks, they rejected big politics, and they said, actually, we want our country back. We want our fishing waters back. We want our borders back. We want to be an independent, self-governing, normal nation. And that is what we have done, and that is what must happen.
I'll keep it short. Lovely. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and good evening, Mississippi. I come to you from the United Kingdom with a message of hope and a message of optimism. It's a message that says if the little people, if the real people, if the ordinary decent people are prepared to stand up and fight for what they believe in, we can overcome the big banks. We can overcome the multinationals. And we did it. We made June the 23rd our Independence Day when we smashed the establishment. And we did it. Everybody said we'd lose. And what did we see? We saw experts from all over the world. We saw the International Monetary Fund. We saw Moody's. We saw Standard & Poor's. We saw global leaders giving us Project Fear, telling us that if we voted not to be run by a bunch of unelected old men in Brussels. Yeah, well, it's okay. They don't like me either, so it doesn't really matter, does it? But they told us our economy would fall off a cliff. They told us there'd be mass unemployment. They told us investment would leave our country. And David Cameron, then our Prime Minister, but no longer, told us we might even get World War III. And we saw the commentariat and we saw the polling industry doing everything they could to demoralise our campaign. On the day of the vote itself, that morning, they put us 10 points behind. And actually, they were all wrong. And they were wrong because what the Brexit campaign did is we reached those people who've been let down by modern global corporatism. We reached those people. We reach those people who have never voted in their lives, but believe by going out and voting for Brexit, they could take back control of their country, take back control of their borders, and get back their pride and self-respect. Now, the big card the Prime Minister decided to play in the referendum is he got a foreign visitor to come to London to talk to us. Yes, we were visited by one Barack Obama. And he talked down to us. He treated us as if we were nothing. One of the oldest functioning democracies in the world. And here he was telling us to vote Remain. So I, having criticised and condemned his behaviour, I could not possibly tell you how you should vote in this election. But you know, I get it, I'm hearing you. But I will say this. If I was an American citizen, I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton if you paid me. In fact, I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton if she paid me. Folks, the message is clear. The parallels are there. There are millions of ordinary Americans who've been let down, who've had a bad time, who feel the political class in Washington are detached from them, who feel so many of their representatives are politically correct parts of that liberal media elite. They feel people aren't standing up for them, and they've actually, in many cases, given up on the whole electoral process. And I think that you have a fantastic opportunity here with this campaign. You can go out. You can beat the pollsters. You can beat the commentators. You can beat Washington. And you'll do it by doing what we did for Brexit in Britain. We had our own People's Army of ordinary citizens who went out and delivered leaflets, who went to meet people where they worked and where they socialised, who convinced and inspired people to go out, if this was the one and only time in their life, and to vote for change. So my advice to you, if you want change in this country, you better get your walking boots on, you better get out there campaigning. And remember, anything is possible if enough decent people are prepared to stand up against the establishment. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, blaming the Russians is not a uniquely American phenomenon. Brexit is now being pinned on Russian interference. Here is the Member of Parliament from the Labour Party, Ben Bradshaw, the leading campaigner for Britain's Remain group, explaining his views. Watch.
When will we realise that Russia's strategy is to weaken and divide the free world, and that driving the biggest refugee flows into Europe since World War II is a deliberate part of that plan? And when will we admit that what Putin can't achieve militarily, he is already achieving using cyber and propaganda warfare? I don't think we have even begun to wake up to what Russia is doing when it comes to cyber warfare. Not only their interference, now proven in the American presidential campaign, probably in our own referendum last year. We don't have the evidence for that yet, but I think it's highly probable.
Joining us now is Nigel Farage. He's the European Parliament member who spearheaded the Brexit movement. Mr. Farage, thanks for joining us tonight. So do you believe that Mr. Bradshaw has evidence to back up his assertion that the Putin government was likely behind Brexit?
I think it's the most hysterical thing I've yet seen. I mean, ever since June 23rd, when we voted for Brexit, there have been all sorts of excuses that have been rolled out. But now to blame it on Russian cyber hacking, I think they've reached a new low. I mean, look, we're seeing this concerted campaign here in the States to try and sort of say, well, Trump wouldn't have won unless Putin had intervened. Frankly, 2016 has been a year of political revolution. The people have spoken. Yes. There's been massive change. And what we're seeing from the establishment and their friends in the liberal media, frankly, they can't accept the result. They're doing everything they can to try to overturn it. Well, do you know what? It isn't going to happen.
So it seems to me this is a manifestation of an anti-democratic, small d democratic impulse, where the people in charge are not interested in hearing from voters, and so they are making excuses for what is obviously, voter desire, as expressed at the ballot box, and blaming someone else, like the Russians.
Well, the people, those in charge, think they are cleverer, better educated, more worldly. They can do a far better job directing our future than we, the peasants, possibly ever could. It's based on this incredible arrogance. And if you look at the way the European project was set up, it was designed so that voters couldn't really change things. And how interesting that Hillary Clinton had seen the European Union as a model for a much bigger form of global common market. So, goodness, isn't it just right that Trump followed on from Brexit? And what we're saying is we want nation-state democracy. What we're saying is actually we don't want to be talked down to or sneered to by bureaucratic, liberal, global media elites. We will make our own minds up on our own future, and you can try as hard as you want to say that it's all some, cooked up conspiracy by Putin. Nobody believes it. They just look like bad losers.
Well, one common thread between the European elites and the American elites is they never blame themselves. So you saw in Mr. Bradshaw's comments, he's blaming the Putin government for the massive refugee flows into Europe. My understanding was that Angela Merkel of Germany kind of opened the door, and that's the key fact.
No, she did. In fact, what Chancellor Merkel said in July 15 was, as many people as come, we can cope with them. And, of course, what it meant is that 80% of people who came would never have qualified for refugee status under any formula. They were mostly young males in their late 20s, using this opportunity to come from all over the world. And what we know is not a single one of them had been vetted in any way to see whether they were linked to ISIS or not. So literally what Merkel did was to import terrorism into the European continent.
So it's a total disaster that will transform Europe forever, and the elites in Europe are blaming not themselves but Russia, not surprising. So what's the next stage of this? So in the U.S. and in Europe, the people in charge have been repudiated but refused to learn a lesson from it. What happens next?
Well, I have a big warning here, because I was in the European Parliament yesterday morning in Strasbourg debating with Mr. Juncker, who is the president of the European Commission, the most powerful bureaucrat in the whole of Europe. And he now wants to push full on for a European army, a militarized European Union, one that effectively wants to get rid of NATO, using the excuse that Trump has been elected. We must now do this on our own. And in tandem with militarizing, a continued push to the east. And by that, what was said yesterday morning is visa-free travel should come in quickly for the Ukraine and Georgia. The association agreement with the Ukraine, which means it's effectively step one of the Ukraine becoming members of this political union. That's the push ahead too. And I really worry. I worry that we're going to see a European Union, wounded animal though it is, dying though it is, but before we get to that point, it's going to provoke some kind of conflict with Putin. And I would say to that British MP who was looking to blame all of our woes on Putin, whether you like Putin, whether you choose to live in Russia or not, why on earth would you provoke Russia? Why on earth would you push a stick into that Russian bear? Because if you do, they're going to respond. And that's why I really hope that President Trump can change things fundamentally. Let's at least start talking to Russia. But let's be aware. But let's be aware that NATO is now directly under threat, not from Donald Trump, but from Juncker and the European Union, who want their own army.
Exactly. And the left in Europe has so much in common with the left here. They do want conflict with Russia. That's obvious. It's becoming clear in the United States. Why is that? What's the impulse behind that? What about Russia enrages them in a way that, say, North Korea and Iran do not?
Well, they have to have an enemy, don't they? And what Putin represents, of course, for all his faults, but he represents a strong leader who believes in his own nation. They call it nationalism, nationism. They talk about these things in pejorative terms. Of course, Putin doesn't like the European project, because the European project wants to make Ukraine, his next-door neighbour, a member of an alternative political and military alliance. Come on, you can't blame him for that. But no, I think all through history, you see that empires that are built, that are struggling, that are failing, they have to have an enemy. They have to have a hate figure, and it's Putin.
And it can lead to very reckless and destructive behavior, unfortunately.
I think that's right, and I think that unless we stop this European army, we could be headed for very real trouble.
Well, their first project would be to put down rebellions like Brexit, I'm afraid.
Well,
thanks for joining.
Well, they can try, but they won't do it, I promise you.
Well, God bless. Thanks a lot.
On the 1st of January last year, a £10 accumulator on Brexit, Leicester City, and Trump becoming US president would have made you 24 million quid. It was a great year. And I've got to tell you, that feeling at 4 o'clock in the morning, knowing that Brexit had happened after 25 years of my life campaigning, it doesn't get much better than that. I went on from there to visit the USA 7 times. I went across and supported Trump in his campaign. That was a big win. And just before Christmas, the Italians rejected Renzi in the referendum, and I think they're headed on their way out of the euro. So 2016, a phenomenal
fantastic year. Don't listen to Bob Geldof and all these terrible whingers and moaners. It's going to be great. It's going to be huge, as they say in New York at the moment. But what of next year? What does 2017 bring? Well, for us, finally, Article 50 will get declared. My goodness me, I wish it had been done months ago. If that was the case, we wouldn't now be waiting for the Supreme Court to tell us whether Parliament can have a vote, whether the House of Lords, as well as the Commons, should have a say. But I'm afraid our Prime Minister has appeared to be somewhat indecisive. So she will trigger Article 50. We'll begin a process where I've no doubt that the Europeans will start treating us pretty badly and start threatening us. What do? Keep ringing in to all the chat shows. Keep the pressure on your local MP. Keep writing to the newspapers. And when it comes to elections, any form of election, well, you must only vote for candidates that genuinely want Britain to leave the European Union. And when people tell you, oh, well, of course, UKIP's work is done, no, it's not. Not by a long chalk. UKIP, without us, there wouldn't have been a referendum. Without us, we couldn't have won the referendum. And without us, if we packed up our bags and went home, well, I'm afraid they would sell us out. So remember that UKIP goes on being an absolutely vital component of making sure, to quote the Prime Minister, that Brexit means Brexit. And for the rest of Europe, what is 2017 going to bring? Well, we've got elections coming up in the Netherlands, in France, in Germany, and believe you me, you'd be a fool to say that Marine Le Pen cannot win the French presidential election. Right now, I'd put her in the low 40%, but all it needs are more appalling incidents, such as that we saw in Berlin, or perhaps more Italian banks going bust, and I think anything, frankly anything, can happen. For me, well, I'm not leading UKIP anymore, which is a great relief to me in many ways, but I'm going to be doing radio, I'm going to be writing, I'm going to be speaking, I'm going to be campaigning, doing my bit. For January, what it means for me is I'm going to go to Washington for the inauguration. I'm going to watch Trump swear in. I'm looking forward to it hugely. It's going to be a massive event. I think he's going to be a very good president. I think he's surprised many of the naysayers. For the rest of you, I want to say this. Don't make any New Year's resolutions that you can't keep. Enjoy New Year's Eve. Have fun. Live life as if it were thy last day. Celebrate our successes in 2016 and look forward to the revolution rolling into 2017.
It's 2:05. We'll just bring you a brief update about our lead story. That, of course, is the resignation of the UK's most senior diplomat in Brussels, Sir Ivan Rogers. We've still not heard formally from him as to the reasons for that, but he is resigning. He was due to be in the post until November. We've just had these comments in from the former UKIP leader Nigel Farage. He's been talking about this. He says he is pleased to see Sir Ivan hand in his resignation.
Well, I'm very pleased. I mean, after all, he's a committed Europhile. He helped lead the renegotiations with David Cameron that went so badly, and then came out the other day with this incredibly negative comment. He thought it might take up to 10 years to renegotiate a deal. Clearly the wrong man for the job. The only regret I've got is that he didn't go the day after the referendum.
But surely he is someone who really knows how Brussels works, who really knows many of the key people across those EU 27 states, and was able to give the government proper analysis and advice from the European perspective.
When you've spent your whole career, as Sir Ivan has, trying to give away Britain's independence and sovereignty because you believe in the European project, it doesn't matter how much expertise you've got, it doesn't matter who you know in Brussels, you're heading in the wrong direction. And I think, in many ways, 2016 did see a political revolution in this country in terms of the way in which the people voted, but we need to see a lot more changes in places like the Foreign Office.
What do you say to the suggestion that he's been hounded out because the Eurosceptics, the most pro-Brexiteers, don't like the message that he was delivering, even if it was accurate.
It's not accurate, is it? It's a nonsense. I mean, the idea that a trade deal can take 10 years, when all over the world there are independent sovereign states who within less than a year, can actually get the nitty-gritty of a trade deal organised. Look, Sir Ivan is part of the establishment that frankly haven't accepted the referendum result and are hoping that frankly it will never happen. And I'm sorry to say, but the Foreign Office is stuffed full of these people from top to bottom. For decades they've been taking Britain in the completely wrong direction, and I hope Sir Ivan's departure is followed by many, many more.